Well, here's a sentence I never thought I'd say. On this episode, we're talking about Clifford the Big Red Dog. What's going on, guys? Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to Victims and Villains, we create content to educate and engage individuals on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia. Among the many hats I wear here, I'm a writer and podcaster primarily. And like I said, we're going to be talking about the latest kaiju movie. So Clifford the Big Red Dog is the latest movie to come out in the grand scheme of 2021's magnificent plan to give us a year of unnecessary reboots and sequels. I'm specifically looking at You, Tom and Jerry and Space Jam: A New Legacy. But unlike those other two, I'm going to show my hands early and say that this one is one that I will endorse. This movie tells the story of Emily, a Harlem girl who basically gets bullied. As a victim of bullying, she's an outcast. Her mom has to go out of town, so Uncle Casey ends up actually watching her, and in the process of that, they end up running into a very mysterious stranger played by Cleese, who gives them a dog, and her tears makes Clifford big. And of course, where there's a good thing that a child has, of course, there's a maniacal villain played by Tony Hale in the corner trying to steal that joy away. Since I ended on Tony Hale as part of the synopsis, I'm just going to jump into him. He is by far the worst part of this movie. Make no mistake that while I showed my hands early and I said that I did enjoy this film, I will also say that Tony Hale is about as cliche and as wooden as they come. Over the last 10 years, we've gotten into this habit as film goers, and specifically narratives that just write really just crappy villains for kids movies. We think that we don't have to give kids credit because they don't know the difference between right and wrong, and it's no, parents are gonna watch this too, and weirdos like me. I grew up in the early 2000s, and so a lot of those villains that I grew up with in kids movies, I still hold true. I still think that they kind of scare me, that they're still entertaining and still worth coming back to. Danny DeVito in the original Space Jam, Jafar from Aladdin, Ian McShane in Agent Cody Banks, and that list just goes on and on and on. Tony Hale just finds himself in this trend that we've just seen an uptick in family media that just seems to just have these very cliche, just very predictable, and just very stale antagonists. Literally, his motive is just to be rich. That is just about as lazy as you can get when it comes to writing, and it just feels like every action that he has is just literally so predictable. As a viewer, I'm watching this movie and I'm predicting 3 steps ahead of everything that he's going to be doing and saying this is how he's actually going to get here. And sure enough, wouldn't you know it, exactly as I predict. Tony Hale, even as a villain, feels very much out of tone in this and in his performance. And really, quite honestly, he just kind of feels out of place. It's like the filmmakers they knew they wanted to tell the story of this girl and this dog, but they're like, we need an antagonist. And so they just kind of thought of the simplest, most shallowest thing that they could think of, and this is what we got. Another huge part of cringy is actually the CGI. So if you're gonna do a live action Clifford the Big Red Dog, you already know that you're going to have a lot of CGI involved. You remember how awkward Steve Rogers looked in the first Avenger before he got buff, and how it just kind of made Chris Evans look like a bobblehead. Like, you could kind of see that they just condensed him. That's what Clifford looks like for the first act before the transformation. Like, he just looks like a very condensed version of what he's gonna grow. It's like they had the image already blown up and they just shrunk it down or made everything around it bigger, and it's kind of embarrassing, honestly. There's other scenes where Clifford's actually interacting with other of the human cast, and there are just moments where those interactions you can just see green screen, and it's very embarrassing. There's one scene in particular where Clifford actually goes to lick the character of Casey, and it just looks like green screen. You can just see it. Like there's a noticeable gap between the two. And there's several things like that. But I will say that this movie has a lot to offer. It has a ton of heart. It has surprisingly decent acting. Like I said, Tony Hale is a completely different story, but the rest of the cast really pulls this off. It's nice seeing Saturday Night Live alum light up this. Kenan Thompson, Alex Moffat, and Horatio Sands actually are some of my favorite characters in this movie. Kenan Thompson actually has one of my favorite scenes in the movie. And it's nice to see David Allen Grier again in a role as a grumpy old super. He's one of my favorite parts in this movie. But overall, I mean, even the comedy in this is, honestly, I was really expecting some Tom and Jerry level, like, really forced humor, and there's a lot of natural stuff that happens. There's a lot of adult jokes in this that I wasn't expecting, and the comedy aspect of it might be one of the most unexpected. Equally unexpected, I will also say this movie just embraces such a huge heart. One of the big things the themes in this movie is that Clifford grows big because of all the love that he has received, and as a viewer, you also feel that giant heart embrace a lot of stuff. The relationship between him and Emily is just not only one of the cutest things that has been set on film this year, but also equally, I will say that it's also just the climax of this movie almost had me in tears, just because of how well it's written and orchestrated. It really does have a lot of moments where you just kind of feel your chest just overpoweringly warm just from the emotion that is coming off of the screen. So I'm going to show my hand right now, and I'm just going to jump into the Rorschach rating scale, and I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 5. This was one of the best surprises of this year. I bought the ticket to this thing as a joke, and I walked out, got back in my car, and just had the hugest grin because I couldn't believe how much fun I had at this movie. And one last thing I'll say is that John Cleese is in this movie very small, but he absolutely steals the show in just about every scene that he's in. Anyways, let's move on to our mental health moment. If you guys are new to our content, mental health moment is where we take a theme of mental health and or something of encouragement and express upon it just for a few moments, and encourage you guys to check out our mental health resource library. And so I'm actually going to talk about the relationship between Emily and Clifford. I have 2 cats of my own, and I frequently have days where at least once a month, I just feel really sad and sometimes depressed. And in those moments, much like you see explored on the screen, that relationship between a human and an animal is such a great form of therapy. It's such a welcoming, just honestly change from an escape from the world. There's just something peaceful about lying with an animal, and that's probably the relationship that I love explored so much in here, is because animals are such a great way to kind of deal with mental health, because if you're having a bad day, you can vent and they're just there. If you're in need of attention and, dare I say, cuddles, they're there. And quite honestly, they're just a big what I'm trying to say is they're great. I highly recommend people that if you're going through something and maybe you can't afford therapy, your insurance won't cover it, pets are a great first way to kind of bridge that gap. until something more sufficient can say it. Now, also want to clarify that pets are not a one size fits all kind of thing of therapy. I would never say that you should invest in animals and just kind of mask the drugs, because in the long run, you guys get what I'm saying. But I do want to also offer up our mental health resource library below if you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression. And if you guys have seen Clifford, if you guys read Clifford as kids, what did you guys think about? What's your favorite story? Did you grow up on the PBS? Make sure that you guys comment below and let me know. This movie is now playing exclusively, simultaneously in theaters and Paramount Plus. I'll include a link in the description below if you guys have not subscribed to Paramount Plus yet, so you guys can check it out. And let me know what you guys think. And until next time, have a great night, guys.